Something is happening that nobody's talking about. The most conscious, awake people are quietly leaving society, not in anger, not making a big scene. They're just disappearing, going off-grid, leaving social media, quitting careers, ending relationships, and choosing to be alone instead of staying connected. Carl Jung saw this coming. He called it the necessary withdrawal. When someone becomes truly conscious, participating in our unconscious society becomes painful. Not just emotionally painful, physically painful. Jung believed this disappearance isn't just likely for awakening people, it's essential. Why? The more awake you become, the less you can handle normal society. And this isn't spiritual bypassing or running away. It's your mind's way of surviving when surrounded by mass unconsciousness. If you've been feeling the urge to withdraw, to disappear, to leave it all behind, Jung would say you're not antisocial. You're becoming too conscious for the collective container. Here's what Jung understood that explains everything. Society runs on collective unconsciousness, shared lies we tell ourselves, mass projections, agreed-upon shadows. These aren't flaws in the system, they are the system. And it only works if everyone participates unconsciously. The moment someone truly wakes up, not just intellectually, but psychologically, they become a glitch in the matrix. They can see the projections that everyone else is living in. They recognize the shadows everyone's avoiding. They understand the games everyone's playing without knowing it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Jung experienced this personally. As his consciousness grew, normal social interaction became unbearable. Not because he was arrogant, but because he was awake in a room full of people talking in their sleep. Every conversation required him to pretend he didn't see what he saw, didn't know what he knew, didn't understand what was really happening beneath the surface. This is the curse of consciousness. You become psychologically alone even when surrounded by people. You're speaking a different language, seeing different dimensions, living in a different reality. The effort to bridge that gap becomes exhausting, constantly translating between your consciousness and everyone else's unconsciousness. So the awakened start disappearing. Not because they hate society, but because staying requires them to betray their consciousness. Every day demands that they pretend to be asleep. Every interaction requires them to dim their light. Every relationship asks them to be less than they've become. Eventually, the psyche says enough. Withdraw. Preserve your consciousness. Stop letting the collective unconscious drain what you've worked so hard to develop. Jung discovered something else. As you integrate your personal shadow, your own dark side, the collective shadow becomes unbearable to witness. You're watching an entire society project its darkness while denying it exists. When you faced your own capacity for evil, watching others project theirs onto scapegoats becomes agonizing. When you've accepted your own darkness, seeing society's shadow projections feels like watching mass psychosis. Because that's exactly what it island. Jung called this the burden of seeing. The awakened person sees that most social conflicts are just shadow projections. Wars are collective shadows fighting. Political divisions are mass projections. Social media outrage is collective shadow material looking for targets. Once you see this, participating becomes impossible. You can't join the mob when you see it's hunting its own shadow. You can't pick sides when you understand both sides are just projecting. You can't blame others when you recognize it as collective unconsciousness. So you withdraw. Not from superiority, but from psychological necessity. One of Jung's students put it perfectly. I used to have strong political opinions. Then I integrated my shadow and saw that my opinions were just projections. Now, when I see political debates, I see two groups violently projecting their unconscious material at each other while calling it justice or truth. I can't participate anymore. It would be like joining a mass delusion. But here's what's really happening. The awakened aren't just seeing the collective shadow, they're feeling it. When you become conscious, you become energetically sensitive. Being around unconscious shadow projection feels like psychological violence. It's not judgment, it's genuine incompatibility. Jung noticed this in his own life. After his individuation, being in crowds became almost unbearable. Not because he disliked people, but because he could feel all the unconscious material swirling around him. The projections, the repressions, the shadows, all creating a psychological storm that only he seemed aware of. This is why awakened people leave social media first. It's a 24/7 shadow projection machine. Every scroll is an assault of unconscious material. Every comment section is people punching themselves while blaming others for the bruises. Jung had another insight. Once you've found your authentic self, performing your persona, your social mask, becomes impossible. And society demands nothing but persona performance. Before awakening, you could play the social games unconsciously. Smile when expected. Say the right things. Play your role. But once you've touched your authentic self, that deeper truth beyond all masks, going back to performing feels like psychological death. Every social situation demands performance. The workplace persona, the family role, the social media identity, the acceptable opinions, the appropriate emotions. For someone still identified with their persona, this feels normal. For someone who's found their true self, it feels like suffocation. Jung discovered this through personal experience. After his confrontation with the unconscious, he couldn't perform the proper Swiss psychiatrist anymore. He couldn't pretend to agree with collective opinions he saw through. He couldn't maintain relationships that required him to be false. So he withdrew to Bollingen, not his tower by the lake, where he could be authentically himself. This isn't antisocial, it's pro-authentic. The awakened person isn't rejecting society from anger, but from incompatibility. They've become too real for environments that require fakeness, too authentic for spaces that demand performance, too whole for containers that only accept fragments. Here's what Jung understood energetically. Maintaining consciousness in an unconscious environment requires tremendous psychological energy, and awakened people are realizing it's not sustainable. Think about what the conscious person has to do in a normal society. Constantly filter out unconscious projections, maintain boundaries against energy vampires, translate between depth and surface, hold their frequency while surrounded by static. Jung called this psychological labor, the invisible work conscious people do just to exist in unconscious spaces. It's exhausting. For unconscious people, this isn't work. They're flowing with the collective current. For conscious people, it's like swimming upstream in a tsunami of unconsciousness. Eventually, you have to get out of the water or drown. Jung identified this withdrawal as archetypal, IST, the hermit phase that every individuating person must enter. Not permanently, but necessarily. The psyche requires solitude to integrate what society would fragment. The hermit archetype isn't about hating people. It's about psychological necessity. When you're transforming at a fundamental level, you need space from influences that would pull you back to old patterns. Jung himself went through profound hermit phases. His years at Bollingen weren't a vacation. They were a psychological necessity. He needed distance from collective consciousness to develop individual consciousness. But here's what Jung emphasized. The hermit phase isn't escape. It's preparation. The awakened person withdraws not to abandon society, but to develop something society needs. They're growing in wisdom, integrating truth, becoming what Jung called aquarium fish, beings who've adapted to depths others can't reach. Jung's final insight offers hope. The disappeared don't stay gone forever. When they return differently, not to participate in unconsciousness, but to offer consciousness to those ready to receive it. They might return as artists creating from authentic depths, healers working with individuals ready to awaken, teachers sharing with small groups of seekers, writers offering maps for other disappearing souls. But they never return to the mainstream. They can't. Once you've individuated, you can't go back. Once you become conscious, you can't pretend unconsciousness. Once you've found yourself, you can't live in a mask. This disappearance isn't a failure. It's evolution. Not weakness, but wisdom. Not abandonment, but archetypal necessity. If you're feeling the pull to disappear, Jung would want you to know this isn't spiritual bypassing. It's a psychological necessity. Your consciousness has developed to a point where participating in collective unconsciousness is no longer possible without betraying yourself. The withdrawal you're feeling isn't antisocial, it's archetypal. You're not abandoning society. You're following the hermit's path that every individuating person must walk. Let yourself disappear. Not forever, but for now. Find your Bollingen, whether it's physical solitude or psychological distance. Stop spending your consciousness on unconscious interactions. Your disappearance isn't selfish. It's necessary. The collective needs people who fully individuated more than it needs people who partially participate. The spiritually awake are disappearing because that's what awakening requires. Not permanently, but necessarily. Not from hatred, but from love. Love of truth, consciousness, authenticity. Love that says, I must become whole, even if that means being alone. If this message spoke to something deep inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe, not just for more content, but to join a growing space where truth, healing, and self-discovery matter. This is Psyche Thera, and your journey is just beginning.